we're talking about the Great Depression. So here's the deal. We have to do a little Econ 101, a little economics in order to understand the whole Great Depression and also the 2008 recession. So here we go. This is, when you take an econ class, you're going to see this graph about 1 billion times, okay? This is the supply and demand curve graph. Here we go. So what this is I'm going to break down each part of this graph. It's pretty simple, but I want to make sure you just understand what's going on here. So you have the y-axis, the one that's going up and down, okay? This green line, the one that's kind of going down like this is your demand curve. This is basically a group of people, the public, the society's demand for a product. So like the product could be like chocolate milk, all right? So this is their demand, okay? This is the supply, but let's get to the actual axes to actually understand what's going on here. This tall one is the price. So the further you go up on this y-axis, the higher the price is going to be. The bottom one is the quantity produced, and that is going from left to right here, this x-axis. So how does this pertain to the two different lines of demand and then supply? So let's start with the demand curve. You'll see the demand curve goes downwards. Starts up top, and it's going downwards, okay? So what's happening here is when the price is super high, the reason why this demand curve starts up here is because the quantity, the amount that the people would want chocolate milk would go down. If the price of chocolate milk was $20 a gallon, the price is so high that the demand for the milk is going to be really low. I'm not going to spend $20 for some chocolate milk. I'm sorry, it's just not my style. So if the price gets really low over here, the demand for chocolate milk goes up. So like if it was like 25 cents or 5 cents for a gallon of chocolate milk, I'm going to the store and buying them out because I love me some chocolate milk. Now you can see here that there's two lines to this wonderful graph here, because it's not just about the people who want to buy it or the demand, it's about the supplier. That's the orange line starting down there going up. Now you're going to see here that the orange line starts downwards. And what this means is that the supplier does not want to make a bunch of quantity of something if the price is low. If the price of chocolate milk was 25 cents a gallon, the supplier doesn't want to make a bunch of it because he's not making that much money off of it. Now, if the price of chocolate milk was going up to, $20 a gallon, he wants to make a bunch, man, because, man, I get $20 per gallon of milk that I make. I'm doing this. So this you can see how there is a conflict here. What will happen is, if the price is super high, you're going to have the supplier making a whole bunch, but you're going to have the people demanding it go way down. In this huge chunk right here, it's called a surplus. There's not going to be enough people buying the material because it's too expensive. And these guys would want to make everyone pay for that material, but they're not going to get that money because it's too expensive. So what if it goes to the other side? What if the price is really low? Well, the price is really low. The suppliers aren't going to make that much, so nobody's going to win there. The goal to any business is to meet this idea right in the middle, right where those two lines hit, the equilibrium. This is where you are producing the exact amount of product and you're selling it at the exact price where you don't have a shortage of materials that you're producing or a surplus. I produce 20 gallons or 21 gallon jugs of chocolate milk, and I sold all 20 gallons. And if I would have made 21 gallons or 21 1-gallon chocolate milks, if I had one left over that nobody bought, I just lost some money because I put money into that last gallon. No one's buying it. You want equilibrium. Whatever you're producing is the amount that is going to be bought at that specific price. And if you had one more and nobody's buying it, it's not going to break your bank, but your equilibrium is you're trying to make a balance between the price and the quantity for both the demand for a product and the supply for said product. This is going to come in important detail when we talk about the Great Depression. 5 major reasons why the Great Depression happened. Now, if There's more than 5, okay? I'm breaking it down to 5 because these are probably one of the most important ones, but most importantly, with these particular aspects, they're the easiest ones to talk about. There's some other things that we've talked about too, but we're going to talk about just these 5, okay? Now remember these 5 in your brain, and it doesn't matter what order you put them in, just remember these 5. So the first one is what was going on with the farmers, because we're going to talk about this first and foremost, because these guys were the first ones to feel the impact of the Great Depression before we labeled it a Great Depression. So farmers is the one. Credit. People buying stuff on credit, which we're going to talk about in just a minute. Then we have the weak banking industry. There was a banking industry, there was a banking structure in our country that just wasn't strong. It didn't have the gusto to fight everything, right? And then you have this idea of income inequality. You have a large portion of wealth going to a select few, even though the 1920s did benefit a lot of people. But at the end of the day, there's a lot more wealth going to a select few. So when it hit those people in the lower classes faster, harder, and more impactful, which was a greater wealth of people that was going to hit, okay? And then finally, last but not least, is the idea of the stock market crashing. Most people would just say this is the thing that caused it. No, the Great Depression, if the stock market crashed by itself, it would not have caused the Great Depression the way we see it today. It would have been impactful. It would have hurt the economy for sure, but nothing like with all the other underlying things that we're going to talk about. So this part of the video is going to talk about the first one, farmers. What's going on with farmers, and how did this kind of leak into the Great Depression? So you got to think World War I, okay? World War I, we're at war with European powers, and we basically armed the United States economy as a weapon to attack them, okay? And it was genius. We just full tilt. We're going in on this. And we gave basically the farmers the green light to produce as much food as you can, okay? We gave them subsidies. We basically paid for them to make a ton of food, all right? Then World War I is over, and you have this surplus of food. But it's more than that. Farmers start buying into technology, right? And this technology they're buying into is making farming go quickly, and you're producing a lot more. So, and they're also going in debt, paying for this new technology, like tractors and stuff. What happens is, go back to the supply and demand curve, okay? What's happening here is, there is an abundance of quantity. The farmers have tons of stuff, right? Tons of food that they're producing, because they were producing it for a war effort, not just for us, but for our allies. Now they have all this surplus of food, the price goes down. I want you to think of it like this. If you came in here today, and I gave one student, like, tons of extra credit that they can give out, just one student, and I gave them like 100 points of extra credit to use in my classroom, they can give it to any student they want. And that student goes, all right, guys, $10 for 10 points extra credit. Like, they're going to start charging for the extra credit, right? Because why not? Why not charge for it? They can give it out, so they just start giving it out, and people are like, I'll pay for $10 for 10 points. Totally fine. I'll pay $5 for 10 points. Whatever. And he can start charging, she can start charging whatever they want, because they have everything, right? It's perfect. The quantity, they own it, right? The demand is high for extra credit, and they have all quantity. Now, let's change the scenario. I give everybody in the class 100 points extra credit to do what they want. Could you sell those 100 points extra credit as easily as me just giving it to one person? No, there's too much of it. I flooded the market with too much extra credit. It's not worth as much. And what happens is with the food situation is there's too much overproduction, let alone the Dust Bowl situation that takes place, which wrecks a bunch of farms. But there's too much production. There's too much food. So they have to lower the prices. Now, what this has is a rippling effect, a domino effect. When you lower the prices too much, what happens is that farmer who produced all this food doesn't get back the amount of money just to supply what he made. Because what he usually sells for maybe $5, he has to sell for like 25 cents or a buck. And he loses a bunch of profit. He loses actually all the profit. He barely breaks even if he does break even. Couple that with farmers spending money in debt on tractors and stuff and other technology, and buying farms that they didn't actually have a chance to buy beforehand. They have all this debt that they can't pay off their debt. They can't pay the living expenses for themselves and their family, or to prepare for the next harvest. So you have tons of farmers that just basically get punched in the face with the Great Depression before any of us even see it. They are the first ones. They are what's called the canary in the coal mine. coal miners usually bring little birds down with them, right? And then a coal and a chip away coal. And when the air got too toxic, these little canaries, they die first because their little bodies couldn't handle the toxicity. So when they see the little canary over there croak, like, all right, boys, let's get out of here because if they're dying, we're probably next. These guys were the canary in the coal mine. This was the moment where you could look at it and go, this could really impact everybody else. All right, when we come back, we'll talk about the next topic. This next topic it's a lot there. It's not just the credit. We're also going to talk about consumerism and when consumerism like turns over to that ugly belly. Okay, so credit, paying things on credit. You ask your parents, your guardians, whatever. Hey, what do you pay for? Do you have cash in your wallet? I just got a credit card, man. Like most people, they're just carrying around plastic, which isn't necessarily bad. It's convenient, right? You just pay for the stuff, no touch, it's all wonderful, right? Good old credit card, right? But here's the deal. Back then, credit just worked a little bit differently. It's not just cards. It's you would go to a bank and you would take out loans, okay? And you would just pay for things on credit. Basically, it's when I use my credit card today, it's not actually giving money to anybody. It's a promise that I'm going to pay the credit card company back because they're gonna pay for it today. It's the equivalent of going out to eat and a buddy of mine going, hey, I'll pay for this dinner if you pay for the next one. Well, that's a credit card company. I'll pay for this object now. Just make sure you give me the money back in full when you at the end of the month. So that's what it is. So people buy on credit. The reason why they're buying on credit is because you have this idea of keeping up with the Joneses, all right? The 1920s was this boom. It's after World War I. Women had jobs. Well, some of them did. There was more disposable income. There was these new gadgets like the washing machine and the radio, which did ads for stuff. And people were like, hey, I want to get that new car. I want to get that washing machine. I want to get whatever. They want to keep up with the Joneses. They want to spend money to look good, right? Consumerism, which isn't a bad thing. Because if you have people that are out there like, I want to buy this, that, and the other, people have to produce those objects. And if people are producing those objects, that means they have a job. That means there's factories producing those things. And the more money they get, the more money they get to spend. It's this wonderful cycle. People are getting money and spending money, which makes people get more money so they can spend money. It's a wonderful thing. But here's the problem. You're paying on credit with the idea that I'm going to pay back. Banks are giving out more loans because everyone's living good. They're going to get us that money back. It's okay to give a loan to this person. It's all good. Until it's not. What happens is consumption goes down. Wow! But as consumption goes down, production doesn't go down right away. Production starts to keep going up on that incline up. This isn't good because remember the supply and demand. The more the quantity you have of something, the less valuable it is. It's like those farmers. They had tons of food. Well, people don't have that same demand for it, so you have to sell a little cheaper to me. And when people aren't buying this stuff, companies are going to go, well, they're not buying our product right now. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to let you go. And as more people get let go from their companies or take wage cuts from their companies, the less they can buy in the economy. And the less they can buy in the economy, the more other producers have to let people go. And as this is happening, all those people that bought things on credit, all those people that went to banks going, hey, can I have a loan? All those people are losing their jobs, and they can't pay that debt back. And that's going to cause some big problems in the next segment when we talk about banks. I want to just rewind the tape a little bit. You have farmers who take the first big hit, right? And you have people buying things on credit, and all of a sudden production keeps going up while consumption goes down. People have to lay off their employees. People start losing their wages. They can't pay off the loans to their banks. Now let's talk about the banking system, why this is number 3, 2, whichever one you want to enable as. It's one of the 5 reasons why the Great Depression takes place. So banking system was weak back then. If you ever watch the movie It's a Wonderful Life, there's a scene where George Bailey is sitting there, and there's like a ton of people in his bank demanding their money. I'm going to take all my money out of the bank, right? Banks were not set up this way. First of all, banks now today are this up. If we had everybody in Sterling, Illinois go to the Sterling Bank if they had a bank account there, and they all demanded all of their money out of the bank at the same day, the bank's going to be like, dude, we don't have that much. They don't store all the money from all their clients in their banks. A lot of it's just zeros and ones in computers somewhere, and they have to actually send requests out if they don't have enough to fulfill that thing. So nowadays, if that were to take place, there's actually a way to get around this. It would actually hurt the bank and other things, but what would happen is they would call a centralized bank, a bigger bank that would send reserve money to them to reach the demand of the sterling citizens who are asking their money from that sterling bank. Back then, it didn't work this way. Okay, so here's what happened. You have banks, right? And you have people, too. People are investing in the stock market back then, okay, which we're going to get to in the next segment. But they're investing in the stock market back then because they had a bunch of extra money. A bunch of people did. They're like, let's just make money for me, because that's how you make your money work for you, is how they would put it. So that's what they're doing, right? Well, banks, what they're doing is they're taking their clients' money, and they're actually taking that money, and they're trying to make money off it, so they're using their money in the stock market, too, at the same time. But keep in mind, that bank does not have all the money of all their clients. They only have a select amount of money within each bank. And what happens is when you have this increase in production, or just a steady increase in production and a decrease in consumption, and you have a bunch of people needing their money to pay off bills or just live, they're all going to the banks at the same time going, hey, where's my money? And when they do this, the banks are like, dude, we don't have this. And there's this huge calamity that takes place where banks actually shut down because of this. And it causes a rippling effect in society because they didn't have a strong central banking system to give a reserve to those banks to help people when they were claiming their money. Eventually, you'd have people that when they would get money from the bank, they would get 25 cents to the dollar, which means if they had, let's say if they had $1 in the bank, they're going to get 25 cents back, okay? If they had $100 in the bank, they're only get about $25 back, and that's it. So this is a problem here, because the money that they had, they're not getting back. This is the rippling effect. Okay, now we're going to talk about the stock market. We need to define some things before we get to the stock market. You know what a stock is, okay? A stock is like partial ownership of a company, okay? If I own stock in a company, it means I own partial ownership, okay? That's all it is. And how that company does will value how much that stock is worth. So GameStop, everyone's paying attention to GameStop for the last couple of weeks because of what was going on. So the value of the company went way up. Why? Because people kept buying stocks in them. They were saying that this company was worth more than people realized, right? And a bunch of people who are kind of using the system to make money, they lost some money off of the deal, which not trying to make fun of them, but sometimes that's how the game goes with the stock market. So anyway, it's the value of the company that will drive that stock price. So if I buy a stock for $1, okay, and that stock that was only worth $1. That's how much I paid for it. It's worth $1, okay? If all of a sudden that company starts doing really good, people might want to buy more of this particular stock, which means the value might go up to $2, $3, $100, okay? That's what you want. You want to buy that stock when it's low, and then you want to sell it to somebody when the demand for it goes real high. That's kind of how it works. So you buy a partial thing in stock, right? And you have banks doing this along with people. Banks are taking money from their patrons, people that come into their banks, and they're taking their money and they're basically putting it on, I'm going to bet on 21 Black, whatever. They're like betting on the stock market, different stocks, to try to make money from that money. Here's what happens. It's a Thursday, Black Thursday as they call it. Some whispers are going around, right? People, this isn't good. You know, production's up, consumption's down. Something bad's going to happen. All of a sudden, people start selling. They're selling. They're just selling. They're just selling. They're just selling. They're selling everything they can, right? Hand over fist, just sell, 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 sell. And when they do this, it creates a crater in the stock market because it's telling the people that the value of this company is dropping because you're trying to sell as much as you can. And the more people that sell, the more people that want to sell because they don't want to be sitting there holding the bag, as you will. Basically, you don't want to be sitting there. If you have a stock that's worth $100 and all of a sudden a bunch of people start selling off their stocks, it's giving the impression that the company is not worth what it's made for. And what's happening is that $100 stock you hold in your hand, by the end of the day, it might be only worth a couple bucks. So you're trying to sell too as fast as you can, which just creates more and more people to sell. Because the problem was people did not buy, when you buy stock in a company, you're buying it because you know that company has value or the product has value. They weren't doing that. People weren't buying it based on the price, based on the promise of the company or the value of the company. They were doing it based on the price of the stock. And because of that, if the company didn't have value or that product didn't have value, you were buying something that's not going to hold water. It's not going to hold you up. You have to buy it on the value of the product or company, not on the stipulation or assumption of value based on the price. So when you're buying it based on the price, not the value of the company, these guys were buying on companies and products that weren't selling that much anymore because that production was going up, consumption was going down. So that product that they were putting a lot of their money into, it didn't work out for them really well. And then the next day, or by the next stock day, which is the following Tuesday, which is called Black Tuesday, it dropped again in double-digit percentages, the stock market. The stock market would actually, the Dow Jones will drop for 3 years in a row after this event. And even though not everyone put their money into stocks, it has a rippling effect. It's only like 3% or even lower, or something lower than that. There's only a small percentage of Americans that really put a lot of money into stocks. But that didn't matter because banks put your money into stocks. And those stocks, that stock revenue is attached to other things in the economy. So it was like dominoes just falling. Eventually, boom, the Great Depression's going to really start feeling it. Income inequality. And how this factors in is when the Great Depression hits, it hits really bad. So there's about 200 companies that controlled over 34 or something, or actually 49% of all the production and wealth within the trading world of the United States. You have 0.1% of the people in our country that owned about 39% of the wealth back then. And because you have this disparity in economic wealth, when people start getting hit, those people at the top, they're going to be okay. They're not going to be able to get all the fancy things that they had before, but they're going to be okay. Problem is, those people that are towards the middle and the bottom classes of society, they're going to get hit right away, and they're going to feel the pain longer. And you're going to see this in the 2008 recession, and you're seeing this now a little bit with the COVID situation, which we're going to talk about in just a little bit. So because of the economic inequality, you have a bigger portion of the population that gets hit harder and deals with the problems of the Great Depression longer than a very small group of the population. Because that income inequality, you have a larger group of the population hit harder and longer. And that right there is one of the big reasons why the Great Depression lasts so long. Unemployment, because unemployment is a big deal in the Great Depression. So in the Great Depression, unemployment reaches its highest. Unemployment is the percentage of people that could work that can't find a job. Okay, it's not like you guys at the age of 13 to 14 years old. It's people that are adults who can work but can't find a job, that are looking for a job. It was about 25%. 25%. It was 24.9, but 25% in the Great Depression. It's the highest the country's ever seen. Hopefully it will ever see. Now, let's fast forward to the 2008 recession, which I'm going to talk about in another video, but I want to talk about the Great Depression, or the unemployment rate there. The unemployment rate reaches 10% because of the 2008 recession. It reaches this in the 2009 range, right after Bush leaves during this collapse of the recession. Bush leaves, Obama takes over, it gets to about 10%, and then during Obama's administration, it goes from 10% all the way down to 4.7% when he leaves office. So it changes, about 5.3%, goes down 5.3% in the Obama administration. Trump picks it up, and that decline in unemployment continues, and you have a drop from 4.7 to about 3.6, so about 1.1% difference between when Obama leaves and Trump picks it up. But then COVID hits. And when COVID hits, the unemployment rate goes from 3.6 all the way up to 15%. So you see this huge jump. The COVID situation that took place last year could have been a lot worse economically than it has been. Now, hopefully it doesn't get that way because there's still a possibility it can get bad, but the government did step in and try to help out as much as they can, and they did as much as they could when they could about the situation. And we're still seeing the effects, and we're going to be seeing the effects for a while in the economy. But you have to understand something. The 2008 recession brought our unemployment rate to 10%. Then through the Obama administration, we got to 4.7%. Then Trump administration, we went just a little bit further and got to 3.6, and then back up to 15, and now it's at 6.9. So all of this matters. It does impact how the world works. When I get back to you, I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about the Great Depression's impact. Talk about government's response. So you have the Great Depression. You have all the 5 factors that feed into this Great Depression, as well as others, but the 5 that we talked about in class. And what does the government do? Well, first thing, Hoover, we already know what he did. It was called volunteerism. He did some other things too. I shouldn't say it's just volunteerism, but generally speaking, he was government hands-off, let the economy just kind of run itself. People will take care of each other, And to a certain degree, people did volunteer more and help each other out, but it just wasn't enough. And we know it's based on the numbers of people who were living in Hoovervilles or just, these small cardboard boxes places. People, their unemployment rate was skyrocketed to 25%. Like, it was not good enough. Now you have FDR coming in. One of the things that comes out of this is the lame duck session, when we talked about the 20th Amendment, where it limits the lame duck from like March to January. It has to do with this. It has to do with this, like there's this crisis, and you have one president who says he's going to try to like really use the full force of the government to get people back to work, and you have the other president going, we're just going to let volunteerism take care of it. Well, this session between being elected and being inaugurated was too far apart. Let's get this new president, get started. Boom, we got, January is when you get in there. So he does this thing called the alphabet soup thing. Now, we call this later on, but the alphabet soup agencies. It's a bunch of agencies that have these different acronyms, different letters to represent what the thing is. So you have like the PWA, the Public Work Administration. You have the SSA, which is the Social Security Administration. You have a bunch of different places that are made, or organizations that are created to create jobs. Public works, building roads, doing whatever. Building stuff in the country to give jobs to people quickly, to get money in their pocket, to hopefully get us out of the Great Depression. Some of these organizations are challenged by the Supreme Court, and some of these Supreme Court cases are lost by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and basically said he's overreaching his power of the executive, which in a strictly constitutional view can be seen as he's doing exactly that. He is expressing too much executive power that is supposed to be meant for the Congress and not just for himself. And because of this, you can't have him do this. However, we were in a crisis, so how much do you give up? And it's this really good argument and debate that you can have, a political argument. When can the executive take on more powers because of whatever is going on in the country at the time? And you have this argument throughout war times, a bunch of other things. So one of the things he wanted to do was his first 100 days is to establish a stronger idea of the banking system. He thought about the banking system was too weak. So he actually orders the banks to shut down for 4 days. And what he does is he has an emergency banking act, which basically goes in there and tries to see which banks were solid and strong, which ones needed help, and what can the government do to help out those banks. This does allow a restoring of faith within the banking system, because the problem is people didn't trust the banks anymore, because it talked about the idea of people going to the banks trying to get their money back, and they're getting 25 cents on the dollar. They're not going to trust the banks anymore. And that's going to cause a lot of problems in the economy, because the banks use that money to make money and to do investments. So that's one of the things he does. Eventually, you'll see that the Glass-Steagall Act, Banking Act, is passed in 1933, which is another way of establishing the federal deposit, which is a more stronger centralized banking system. To prevent another stock market crash, Congress passed the Federal Security Act, which required companies to provide information about the finances if offered stock of the value. So it wasn't just about, this looks shiny. It's more descriptions that the company has to give about the products that they're selling, or the company themselves. So when people buy that stock, they know what they're buying specifically. So if the bottom falls out again, it's on them, not necessarily the company. They created a Social Security Exchange Commission to regulate the stock market itself. And a lot of these things are going to come back and be in discussion during the 2008 recession or prior to, and we'll talk about that later in another video. He also did this thing called the Social Security Act, thing that we take advantage of today. If you get hurt on the job, there's unemployment benefits. There's if you are permanently injured, or disabled, you can get a Social Security check that will help you live off of. It's not a lot of money, but it's some amount of money that allows you to live a little bit with it. A lot of these things we take advantage of today come out of these alphabet soup programs of FDR in his New Deal. And that's a really big term you need to know. His plan is called the New Deal. And it's this huge package of legislation that tries to get us out of the Great Depression. Now, there's arguments on both sides that it didn't do enough, that it did exactly what it was supposed to do, that it did get us out of the Great Depression, something else got us out of the Great Depression. It's more of a combination. It helped, but it wasn't the only thing that got us out of the Great Depression. A lot of people say, World War II got us out of the Great Depression. No. There's this idea of correlation without causation. Something happens, therefore that's the thing that created whatever happened next. That's not necessarily true. World War II had an impact on the Great Depression, but it wasn't the thing that got us out of the Great Depression. Neither was the New Deal. a bunch of things working in concert with each other, working together, will actually help us get out of the Great Depression. It's not as easy as it did it, or X did it, Y did it, B did it. Sorry, the world doesn't work that way. It was a bunch of things working together that eventually gave us the need or the power to get us out of the Great Depression. Next time, we're talking about the 2008 recession, and we're talking about the next big economic collapse, possibly.